Okay, thank you guys for joining. Today we're going to recap the AMC trade that we took today. So here we go. First of all, we know that the weekly trigger right here is a very big acceleration level. And so bears had to do their job to defend this weekly trigger, and they did it once here and twice here. And the third time, price broke above and ripped about 22% to the upside with options. Everybody knows you can make a lot of money with that. So what I want to go over is why we didn't take calls on any of these times where price poked above the weekly trigger, but why we did take calls over here. So this green line that you're seeing is the 5-minute trigger, and we don't consider it to be a break above the weekly trigger until the 5-minute trigger crosses above. So if you pay attention here, you can see that although price was able to move above this weekly trigger, the 5-minute trigger never crossed the weekly trigger. And this is actually called a bear plane when the 5-minute trigger comes up to the weekly trigger but then rejects. We call it a bear plane, and then price actually moved pretty bearishly all the way down back to 455 or so, up from 676. So we move down here now and we see price poked above the weekly trigger again. Why didn't we take calls? Pay attention to the 5-minute trigger. The 5-minute trigger never crossed the weekly trigger. Over here again, price comes up to the weekly trigger, rejects, the 5-minute trigger never crossed above. Over here, 5-minute trigger crossed above when price was about 690-ish. So here's how we played this one. We went long once the 1-minute trigger crossed above, and once you go long with the 1-minute trigger, so let's say we get long right here at 675. The trick is you want to have a stop loss on any candle close below the weekly trigger, or if you want to be a little looser, if you have further dated contracts, once you go long, you could put a stop loss under the 5-minute trigger. So you guys can see that pretty much immediately after the 5-minute trigger crossed the weekly trigger, there was this huge red candle in an attempt to scare out call holders. And then price ramped up really strong right here, right after we got the 5-minute trigger to cross the weekly trigger. So again, these crosses are very, very, very important. Once AMC had the 1-minute trigger and the 5-minute trigger above the weekly trigger, that was right over here. That's when price made the strong move up. The exit, you could exit in two ways. You could exit when there's bearish divergence in the velocity, which there was not. Velocity moved great the entire time. Or you can exit when price moves below the 1-minute trigger, which is what I did. Actually accidentally stopped out here, which I guess I'm grateful for at the end of the day. But I meant to have a stop loss on any candle move below the 1-minute trigger. So in this example, we went long on the 1-minute trigger crossing above the weekly trigger at about 675, and we were out of our calls at 7.63. This was a 283% gain for the calls that I had bought, and that's basically the trade. So for the future, what we can learn from this is that the weekly trigger is a very important, very, very, very important and powerful acceleration level. But the long move, the when do you take calls, is not confirmed until the 5-minute trigger crosses above. Once the 5-minute trigger crosses above, that's pretty much your confirmation that price has officially, quote unquote, broken through the weekly trigger. This is a false break because the 5-minute trigger never crosses. This is a false break. The 5-minute trigger never crosses. But here, once the 5-minute trigger crosses, we consider that as a price breaking above the weekly trigger, which is a very strong acceleration level. And that's why once price broke above, we had this really nice acceleration to the upside. As long as price remains above the 5-minute trigger, the next logical place that price would seek out would be up here towards this monthly trigger at 983.